Until March of this year, I spent my entire career working in national newsrooms covering federal politics. And that's why I'm so confused watching major media effectively ignore what seems to me like an obviously major story. Here's what's going on. As I've been reporting this week, Pierre Poilievre made a homophobic and transphobic remark recently, implying that, quote, radical gender ideology was being imposed on kids. That term that he used is strictly associated with pushback on LGBTQ rights and, if you go back to the 90s, women's rights. And over the last few days, major national LGBTQ rights organizations have condemned the remarks, like when Egal Canada called them deeply hateful and harmful. The first openly trans conservative candidate called the rhetoric the party's using evil. And the guy who was standing next to Poilievre as he made the comments has faced calls to resign and has had to apologize. And if all that isn't enough to convince you this is newsworthy, last night a high-profile NDP MP, Peter Julian, called on Poilievre to immediately and profoundly apologize for the, quote, hateful, homophobic, and transphobic comments. On top of all of that, it's Trans Awareness Week. Yet, when I searched Canada's largest news websites for mention of Pierre Poilievre and gender ideology in the last week, this is what I got. So it's not just me missing it. The only websites covering the issue are Press Progress, The Hill Times, and YorkRegion.com. Now, I know there are a lot of other things in the news right now that are incredibly important and need coverage. But today, these were the top stories on the most popular news aggregator for Canadian political media. That's not the aggregator's fault. This just shows that newsrooms still have plenty of time for some political stories. So I guess my question here is, why isn't this worth a single article? I know most of my colleagues mean well and do their best despite shit pay and brutal hours. And I am not saying those other stories, like Trudeau's absolute floundering in the polls, aren't worth telling. But major media's total silence on the story that I would argue is clearly newsworthy is being heard loud and clear by the people fighting for trans rights. And the message that sends to trans folks living across the country does not sit right with me. What do you think of all this?